There are two laws that really have been at the forefront of the accessibility movement in U.S. higher education: the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Both are civil rights laws. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is considered the first legal enforcement to give disabled individuals equality. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs run by federal agencies, programs that receive federal financial assistance, in federal employment, and in the employment practices of federal contractors. It's often referred to by two of its sections, 504 and 508, which will be discussed shortly. The thing about this law, however, is it is focused on ties to federal funding, which left out a good portion of America's businesses, places, and services from being responsible. Additionally, its definition of a disability is considered narrow in scope. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act became the other major law to protect disabled individuals. This time, there wasn't that federal tie, and a 2008 amendment made it even easier for an individual to be protected. The ADA protects more individuals in more places than the Rehabilitation Act. Section 504 was part of the original 1973 law. It requires equal opportunity through reasonable accommodation for accessible programs, physical environments, and communications. Think in terms of student support services. Accommodations, or auxiliary aids, can include modified or supplemental materials, for example, large print, transcripts, qualified support individuals, for example, sign language interpreters, assistive devices, TDDs, braille printers, etc. Section 508 was passed 25 years later in 1998. It laid down set standards for digital communications that are tied to federal programs. Many local government and private sector entities also abide by 508 compliance. WCAG guidelines and criteria for success go beyond these standards, but many local governments, businesses, and institutions, public and private, still embrace 508 standards. The Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, or VPAT, is a common checklist to assess how well a product or service does in complying to 508 standards. Many vendors that seek to retain higher ed and, of course, government clients use VPAT compliance as a strong selling point. The templates are maintained by the Information Technology Industrial Council. The Americans with Disabilities Act became law in 1990 with an important amendment passed in 2008. It prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. It is not limited to the federal government. The 5 titles or sections of the ADA are Employment, which requires employers with 15 or more employees to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified applicants or employees. Public Services, which are programs, services, and activities operated by state and local governments. It requires self-evaluation and planning, making reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures to avoid discrimination, identifying architectural barriers, and communicating effectively with people with disabilities. This title specifically states that communications with persons with disabilities must be as effective as communications with others. Public accommodations and services operated by private entities. This 3rd section prohibits privately owned, leased, or operated facilities like hotels, restaurants, retail merchants, doctors' offices, sports stadiums, movie theaters, and other places of public accommodation from discriminating against individuals with disabilities by making reasonable modifications. This includes removing physical barriers in existing buildings where it is easy to do so without much difficulty or expense. This Title III is what extends the law beyond the government ties. Telecommunications. The 4th title requires telephone and internet companies to provide a nationwide system of interstate and intrastate telecommunications relay services that allows individuals with hearing and speech disabilities to communicate over the telephone. It requires closed captioning of federally funded public service announcements. Lastly, the Miscellaneous Provisions title contains a variety of requirements relating to the ADA as a whole, including its relationship to other laws, state immunity, its impact on insurance providers and benefits, prohibition against retaliation and coercion, illegal use of drugs, and attorney's fees. It also provides a list of certain conditions that are not to be considered as disabilities. The ADA Amendments Act of 2008 clarified the definition of disability, making it easier for an individual seeking protection under the ADA to establish that he or she has a disability within the meaning of the ADA. ADA has postponed digital requirements a few times already. Companies and organizations should enact now, though, even though there is another delay. These regulations will fall under Title III, Public Accommodations, and are expected to follow WCAG 2.0 Level AA standards. Currently, 2018 is the anticipated enactment date. There are many examples of lawsuits brought against institutions of higher education in violation of the laws we just reviewed. The violations are as varied as the institutions.